Okay, we're talking about Runebearer magic. This is the 18th time I've started this video. Okay, that's hyperbole. It's like the 5th time I've started this video. In any case, um, magic is really the reason why Runebearer exists today as a separate game. Before I wrote the game, we were playing Fantasy Hero 3rd edition, and a little bit and 4th, but 3rd primarily. And Hero has an amazing system for creating powers and spells and the whole thing, and you can create a bunch of different effects and so on. And it does work really well. It is well balanced. It's all generic. It fits well within the game world and the rest of the physics that the game sort of postulates. So in that sense, Hero is a great fit for a fantasy game. But what I found was as the mental model of the world and how I then wanted magic to be in the fiction started to come together, what I found was I kept having to break Hero's rules to make it all sort of work out. The how you gained magic, how you cast it, and how you when the spells that actually existed in the world started to make it less easy to just create some stuff with Hero, and I kept having to set and make special rules effectively to fit. And so I thought, well, if we're making special rules anyway, why not just jump in and make rules? So I did. So that's where Runebearer came from. Let's talk about magic, and there's different types of magic in Runebearer. There's today. There's ritual magic. The priests have invocations. There is alchemy. But we're talking tonight specifically about runic magic because that's the big one. That's the one that is the most interesting, I think, and the one that everybody sort of thinks of when they think of the game. All my players think of when they think of the game. Um, so runic magic effectively means that all rune mages are pretty much sorcerers. If you have a D&D 5e sort of mental model of wizards versus sorcerers, wizards are the scholarly ones, sorcerers are the innate talented, right? We have the blood of dragons or whatever. Or they're almost warlocks, right? They make a pact. They're somewhere between sorcerers and warlocks. There you go. So runes are magic focuses, and typically the idea is that someone with enough willpower or drive or luck um, will mark themselves or sacrifice something of themselves in exchange for power. And the contract is that rune. Um, Now, don't get me wrong, that sounded way more dramatic than maybe it comes out in play sometimes. But some of them are simply tattoos. For instance, the mathematicians have the first equation, and when they reach enough enlightenment, they get the first equation tattooed on their arm, and that then binds them to the inherent equations which run the universe, and thus they gain some powers over space and time. The Sacred Falls of Estra is the goddess's gift to her chosen, and to gain that rune, they have to, in effigy, effectively do what the faithful did when the Father Stratus was destroying the heretical world um, with nuclear fire, and they have to, and they submerge themselves into the dark lake like the old ancients submerged themselves into the sea. Um, and risk drowning themselves. Like, that is actually a risk. You don't just necessarily gain the rune, you could die. Now, that's not every rune, but that is sort of a vague theme that it's like, well, something bad could happen if this goes wrong, or if you don't have the right stuff, or if you're not talented enough, or driven enough, or powerful enough, or whatever. The first equation would be, well, you have to have, you have to pass your actuary exams to. um, but yeah, like the Sacred Falls, they they don't let certain of the the little sisters, as they call them, right? They don't let them necessarily take it because they don't feel they'll survive. Um, Firewinder effectively is you have to create arson so big that the fire takes on a consciousness, and then you have to commune with that consciousness. So literally, like the idea being that fires that are so large, like a forest fire or a huge conflagration, are intelligent, malicious, and intelligent. And by constructing one of these and then walking to it and into it, you maybe gained some piece of its power. Um, so a lot of magic is not really a scholarly pursuit. Ritual magic is, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about rune magic. Rune magic is by far probably the most powerful magic in the game, and it is bound by lunatics. No, it is it is you marking yourself or sacrificing or right, you performing some act of binding between you and the power, effectively. Um, so yeah, there's volcanic runes. There's Earth's blood, which is the blood, literally the blood of the earth, like the tar. Um, there is the Gale of Teeth, which has to do with the elemental power of the winds and the mountains, and so on and so forth. So they're very so a rune tech in game terms, a rune is largely a skill, and it is a highly themed, tight set of powers, spells that you get, um, and can then cast those. So there you go, right? Um, Acquiring runes, again, it totally depends on the rune. So, like I said, the mathematicians you have to study. The priestesses effectively drown themselves. Um, there's a rune where you go into a tower and become ritually scarred by this Hellraiser device that's in there. Um, there's a rune that actually tries to lure you in and then attacks you, giving you a third eye. So there's any number of different ways to get a rune. Typically, so that's listed with the rune. Obviously, if a character wants to start with one, within reason. I mean, the problem, of course, is that where magic should be rare and wondrous, everybody wants to be one because it's so interesting half the time. Because everybody like, ooh, I want. So, for instance, we have like four people with runes in our party. Um, so, I mean, the game's named after it, so I suppose you'd have to expect that. Now, mind you, we have 8 characters, but in a party of 4, I would typically expect one of them probably to have a rune, maybe two. Um, so yeah, so effectively, you gain, um, you do the test, and then you get what's called the first tier spell. So everything there's 4 tiers of spells, and you get the first tier to start. The second one you only get once your base skill is 11. The third is 14. And the fourth tier, that would be your 6th through 9th level, spells in D&D or whatever. Like the high end stuff, you only get once your base skill is 17. Keep in mind your best skill can only go to 20. So you're getting to the end of the game at that point. We have had a few people in history get 4th circle spells. We've gotten that high. We typically don't. But there you go. Now, keep them. So first and second tier. So here's the other thing. First and second tier, you just get. So typically everybody's going to start. So all the characters that started with runes in the game start at an 8 base level. So once they level up that skill 3 times, which does take a while given our speed in the campaign, it's going to take a little while. Once they do get to 11, they get the second tier spells. They just do. But 3rd and 4th tier spells, you have to do something again to get them. And that could be So, it even says, right? So, many runes have conditions or tests. It has to do with the purpose of the rune, and they become more difficult as mage progresses. Um, so yeah, typically what I usually I don't have a lot of runes with second circle. The rules say here that even second circle. This is actually the old paragraph. Um, but yeah, typically, for most runes, first and second circle are freebies, and it's third circle where I go, okay, you got to do something now. Go on a quest. You have to. I mean, there's something you have to do, and it has to do with the rune specifically. So you might have to return to the rune site and retake the rune, or commune again with the being that gave you the thing, um, and so on. And because of the way experience goes, the time between third and fourth, even though it's only 3 levels, is going to be fairly big. And fourth circle again is some bigger commit, and so on. So yeah, the conditions to then rise up in the tiers varies per rune, and it typically gives me something to do game wise for you, right? Um, one character is the monks, right? They're the students of the seven virtues. So my son, who has a student of seven virtues, to get third circle, will probably have to go, you know, defeat another monk, and he has rune of the body, so it's all buff physical, right? He probably has to go and defeat a monk in some contest of prowess or strength or combat, and so on. So yeah, so it just gives me something. Once you get to third circle, and we do something for that rune, and get you have to go fulfill some condition. So casting spells, again, every roll in the game is an opposed D12 roll. You roll and you add your skill level. The GM rolls and adds the difficulty of the spell. Difficulties of first tier spells are 10 typically. Difficulty of second tier spells are 14 typically. And then 18 and 22 for third and fourth. And then as you cast, and boy, I hate to say it, but boy, we could just, if we drop this one, there we go. That's a way better. Oops, no, I don't like that. Okay. So yeah, so when you cast, so there are degrees of success and failure when you cast a spell. If you cast and succeed just barely, you're going to lose a skill level. So if your skill is 14, your skill goes down to 13, thus making later spells harder to cast. If you fail, you're going to lose 1 to 3 skill levels based on your degree of failure. If you succeed by 3 or more, you do not lose anything and you cast for free. So yeah, so that's sort of, there's no mana, there's no spell points, there's no spell slots. Obviously, high level mages have an easier time casting first circle spells. They can typically do that pretty freely. But if you've just gotten into a circle of spell, those spells might be hard to cast, and you might be burning your levels to do so. Yeah, there we go. Burning hit points. So now you do not have to. Oh, no, that didn't work. Okay, there we go. In lieu of losing skill levels for casting, you can choose to take damage to your hit points directly, 3 points per level you would otherwise have lost. It can't wound you, but all that damage goes straight to like the permanent column, we call it. It can only be healed over time. Or by a physician. I'll have to redo. We'll just put overtime. Because you don't want people to magic themselves out of or by a physician. So it becomes long-term damage. So it takes days to recover if you take those. And I mean, it makes sense to do it if you're just starting and you blow a roll or something. You want to take the hit points instead, right? But keep in mind that characters also have inspiration, so they can re-roll twice in a given typically a game session or an adventure. So there is a lot of mitigating factors there. But at some point, your mage is gonna burn themselves out. Um, each full night of rest can give you 2d4 levels in a rune of your choice, and 1d4 in all other runes. If you have multiple runes, you actually gain magic back a little faster, um, and so on. There's also a meditation skill, which will give you more spell levels back. Gaining spell levels typically is not that hard, but you do need to rest, and um, sometimes it is difficult, and sometimes there are conditions. So, for instance, certain Earth's Blood mages have to have the ground beneath them. They can't be at sea, and they can't be sleeping off of the ground. So they have to. So if they sleep on like the second floor of a building, they don't gain levels. Or if they go on a boat, they no longer gain levels. Priestesses of Estra, to regain levels in the Sacred Falls, in the morning must immerse themselves in water, entirely head to foot, in water. Even a bathtub will do, but they have to be immersed in water, or else they cannot recover magic skill in that room. And so typically it's not an issue, and that's good. We don't want it to be an issue. Typically, we want our mages to be able to use their powers, but every so often it becomes an issue. And gives us reason to do stuff and have role-playing situations and so on, right? The Earth's Blood mage who always has to sleep on the ground floor, right, or is afraid of water or something like that, right? So that's sort of how it mostly goes. Also, certain spells fatigue levels, and certain spells require investiture. Fatiguing levels just means no matter how well you roll, you're going to lose extra levels. And I do that typically for spells that either have bigger effects that we want to sort of discourage wanton use of effectively. Spells that, and there aren't too many spells that might step on another character's toes. So, for instance, a spell that would pick a lock, strangely enough, is probably going to have fatigue, because having that spell and being able to just cast it at will then makes the lockpicking skill obsolete. And that's great. I don't mind that, as long as there's not a character with lockpicking skill. So, typically, if your spell is going to step on another character's domain, now this isn't they're in the spell description, right? So I don't make this up on the fly. Certain spells will fatigue spell levels. Those are spells with some kind of game-changing, life-altering, or life-saving effects, or spells that I feel, as I'm writing them, will step on another character's sort of spotlight. And that way, it discourages the mage from just using that and lets the character with the skill do it. So, like I said, lockpicking is the easy example. But there are certain spells. I think even Portal has a spell that lets you look through a door. And that's a great power, and it makes that character super unique. But I put a fatigue on that spell so that way it's not something you do to every door. Done. Even as a high-level mage, he's not going to do that to every door. He's going to go, okay, guys, this is important. I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it if it's not important, because I don't want to burn my levels. Done. Investing is even worse. It literally means you have to burn a level, and it goes away, and you have to regain that level through experience. So if your spellcasting level was a 16, it goes down to a 15 permanently, and you have to re-earn that level of experience in the spell, in the rune. And those are the big earth-shattering ones. A lot of those are high-level 3rd tier, 4th tier spells that like, there's a marsh song, right? It's the song of the swamp, and you can create a swamp. I don't want the characters to be creating swamps everywhere. Just not cool. I don't want to rewrite the map with swamp. So that spell costs investiture. Your level goes down permanently. You have to regain it. So there you go. So we have, just we'll skip to casting time here. So for instance, so the spells don't have direct casting times. Instead, we just sort of fudge it. So you'll notice all the casting times. Words are special. They are literally a word and a simple hand gesture. It does require at least one hand free to cast a spell in the game. You cannot be tied up. You cannot be gagged unless otherwise stated in the spell description. All spells have a verbal and somatic component which requires a single hand. There are typically no material components unless it's in the spell. It will say you have to do a thing. Word spells take almost no time to cast. They're half phase actions. Bam. Combat spells are full phase actions, and we do something called drum rolling. So when you, on round one, if you are casting a spell that is a combat spell, it doesn't go off that round. You have to wait the entire round all the way through the next round till when it's your turn to act again. And then you can release the spell in round two as a free action and then take your next action. So words are not that. Words are half actions. You can walk up to someone and cast a word, or you can cast a word, as a half phase. You can make a move. You can move 3 hexes and cast a word. Combat, you are stuck there. You are casting for the whole round. People can hit you, right? It's the typical whole mage is vulnerable sort of idea. And you take a lot of, you take penalties based on, so for instance, it says being in the fray. So meaning if, like a ranged attacker, if you're casting and you're next to a melee combatant at all, you take a penalty. There is not engaged. Combat short is like a combat spell. It takes a whole round. It takes a drum roll, but you don't take any penalty for being in the fray because it's a little bit easier to cast. It's a little shorter. Not engaged is clunky because it's super. You could concentrate. Any damage will stop it. Combat spells, damage, you get a roll, that kind of thing. And then everything else, once you get past this not engaged, none of these are combat castable in combat. Very short. It's super quick, right? Short's a couple minutes. Long is maybe an hour, and very long is don't know. It's in the spell description. So typically the idea would be word, combat short, not engaged, all are combat spells. You can cast these guys in a fight. Very short is you could cast it in time between the fights. Let's say you just got done, you wiped out a bunch of goblins. Other goblins are running down the hall. You could get you can see them, but they're not in combat range. You could cast a very short spell would be the idea. Right? Or someone's beating down the door. You can cast a very short spell. It's imminent, but you're not in battle, right? In the heat of battle, you cannot cast a very short spell. A short spell, oof, okay. I mean, it's a couple minutes. It takes a little bit of concentration. You probably can't. You probably wouldn't want to be rushed, right? You probably don't. This is not the spell with which you defuse the bomb, unless the bomb has several minutes on the timer. And then long and very long are just you really need to be, casting that without distractions. That's the idea. You can maintain spells. You can maintain spells. Some spells are maintainable, which means you don't have to recast them. So if a spell lasts, say, 10 minutes, but it's maintainable, then every 10 minutes you get to make a roll, which is easier than the original cast to maintain the spell. Typically, it's 2 less. And you can maintain multiple spells. Now, that could be clunky bookkeeping. So what we do is we actually roll up all of the spells you are maintaining, and it becomes a 1 or at most 2 rolls based on the lengths of the spells you're maintaining. Like we do short-term spells and long-term spells as 2 separate buckets. So for instance, let's say you're maintaining 2 spells, one with a difficulty level 14 and one with a difficulty level 10. We take 2 less than the worst spell you have, so the difficulty 14 becomes a 12, and then half of the rest of them. So all the 10s actually become 4s because it's -2 and half of that, right? So we would add the 12 and the 4. I know that was clunky. There's an example here, and it's theoretically written well enough. Um, I gotta bold that. There we go. But the idea is we roll the spells up into a single roll. Now, if you fail that roll or succeed by not enough, you still lose levels, but the spells do not have to drop unless you want to make them drop so as not to lose the levels. So the idea is, let's say you blow it and you go, oh man, I'm going to lose 3 levels. I don't want to. I'm going to drop these spells instead. And you can just drop them. Or you could drop one of them if that will make that work and you don't have to lose as much, right? So you actually have the choice at that point. Um, uh, so yeah, so you can make a choice. So here's an example. So let's do Zoltar the Oddly Named has 3 spells active. DL10 spell, a DL12 spell, which is sort of, there really are no more DL12 spell. I normalized all the DLs, but that's and a DL14, which is duration 3 hours. So there's 2 categories here. There's short spells and long spells. The first 2 are short because their time is in rounds. And so what we do is we take the higher one, subtract 2 is 10, so that DL is 10, and then this one is -2 divided by n half. So actually we take half of that, its maintenance cost. So here's the maintenance DL is 8, the maintenance DL is 10. So it's 10 plus half of this. So the total DL for his short spells are 14, and he has to roll it every 6 rounds. Because you always have to roll when the shorter spell ends. So as a mage, you have some options. You could go, well, geez, I'm not really happy maintaining this making that roll every 6 rounds. That's a lot. I'm going to drop the short spell, and then your maintenance would go down to 8, and you'd only have to roll it every 10 rounds, and so on. This spell is it's a long, so we roll it every 3 hours, and he has to roll a DL12 every 3 hours. So you divide the spells up into short and long. The maintenance difficulty is 2 less than the casting difficulty. Multiple spells, we take the worst, the highest level spell, the highest DL spell you have, and maintain it, and then half of the rest of the spells, it all gets rolled up into a single roll. You roll once every X time, X being the shortest of the spells that you're maintaining. We go, oh crap, you didn't lose levels or you did lose levels, and then you decide, I'm just gonna, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna drop this spell, and then that makes it okay, because that, and so on. So, but you can still keep. So here's the thing about maintaining too. You can keep the spells even if you lose levels. You can like, you know what? I'm going to lose the 3 levels. So let's say, for instance, that his DL16 maintenance. So both of those spells. He's like, I got to maintain these spells every 6 rounds. He could roll and go lose 3 levels, and he goes, you know what? I'm losing the 3 levels, and he could just go and lose 3 levels or hit points. You know, he could just keep doing that. He can go, I'm going to lose 3 levels. I'm going to lose 3 levels, and only until he reaches 0 will those spells have to drop. So the nice thing is you could sit here and go, okay, you have to, let's say these spells are holding closed a door, and something behind that door is awful. And if he gets at, the party's dead. If they hold out for 50 rounds, we're good, right? You could dice that out, and he could sit there and bleed himself until he reaches 0, and then the magic breaks and he goes. And it's actually stuff like that typically which you find will will drag mages down. Like you might have some life-saving spell on somebody that is keeping them alive or stopping them from bleeding out, and you have to maintain it for a couple hours, while someone goes and runs back for help or something of that nature. And that's what's going to bleed you to like 0 levels, is maintaining that typically. Now, having said that, if you're high enough level, then you might be able to maintain a couple small spells for nothing. No, for free for the most part, if you roll well enough. And so we do allow some spell alterations sort of by default. So, for instance, spells that affect a single target, let's see, a self spell can now affect a single target. So, for instance, you could take a spell that's only a buff that's only for you, and you could cast it on someone else, but that makes the DL3 higher. You could give a spell a 1 hex area of effect or increase the area of effect. You can get pluses to hit and pluses to damage. And so give touch spell a range. And all these little minor tweaks you can do for just rolling a higher DL. And again, that allows the higher level mages to play around a little bit more with their spells. So they might go, well, I want to take this cheesy level, this cheesy first tier spell that's only for me, but I want to cast it on my friend who's 5 hexes away from me. Done. It's plus 6 DL. So there you go. So there you go. We also can do some goofy, clever uses. Like you can, if you want to make something up, the GM's comfortable with it, and go, I would like to use my. Let's say you had a spell to make it ice, and you had a spell to make an area slippery on the ground. You could say, I would like to make his sword slippery, or right, I want to cover the grip of his sword in frost and make it slip out of his hand. And the GM can let you go for whatever the deal is that makes sense. So that's and now I typically only allow that once per goofy effect. And then at that point, you have to start thinking about creating a new spell. Like if you're going to use something more than once, you should consider creating a new spell. And again, the rules here are sort of. So there was a talent called unique spell, and I need something to fix it. So this again is the old text, and I need to sort of fix that, I think. Not that there aren't talents, but I mean, I have to figure out where talents fit. So that might work, and we might have to check. I mean, you know, because we're actually not using talents the same way that we're in the original rules. We're sort of slow playing talents a little bit. We'll talk about that. So the idea would be you you spend your experience to do it. That's largely the gist of it. Talent or no talent. The idea is going to be you're going to spend experience. You're going to write up the spell with the GM. The GM is going to approve it, and then that spell is harder for you to cast until you do it like 4 times. Effectively, the first time you cast a spell, it's at a DL plus 4, and then it drops by 1 until it's a normal DL. And then the idea, so there's sort of a weird lore thing too. So created spells are available to the creating mage. When the mage returns to his rune site to gain a new circle, he transfers his created spells to the rune. Other mages with the same rune will now receive that spell when they return to the rune site. First through third circle spells are transferred this way. Fourth circle spells are only given to the rune site when the mage dies, and he must be at the site at the time of his passing. Otherwise, the spells are lost. And I might loosen that a little bit or make it mysterious, or leave it up to GM fiat a little bit for interest's sake. But the idea is that spells are sort of viral a little bit, and as I create spells and I return to go get my my third circle or fourth circle in the rune, those spells transmit then to the rune, and other mages come and get those. There you go. Otherwise, we have, so there's a bunch of And the rest of the rules here are just ways to use different skills um, to learn how, it's largely the arcana skill checks in D&D. Can you learn what a mage's powers are? Can you identify a rune that another mage has? And there are skills to do that sort of thing. Now let's I do want to look at a rune here just to give you sort of a vague idea. This is the Foul Bellows. Now it's not actually fleshed out, frankly. Um, there's no rune site per se. So we're not quite there. This is not done yet. But the idea would be, the Foul Bellows. And is it foul or foul? I don't know, actually. That's a great question. The Foul Bellows is a wreath of so every rune marks you. Remember, it is a wreath of black crow feathers around the caster's wrist. It could easily be mistaken for a bracelet until you realize it cannot be removed. Done. So you could see it, you could spot it. A character with rune lore could go, "Oh, I know what that is," right? Just by and so on. That marks you as a witch, potentially, or right, something like that. The wise crow spirit has its own agenda, inscrutable to mankind. There is no known purpose to the rune. No fixed rune site because the crow spirit carries the rune. Now to bind it, so here you go. And of course, again, I've used foul and foul. And we're gonna go with the pun. It's W everywhere. Come on. The Foul Bellows is given to a human that impresses the wise crow spirit. Impresses, right? You can do this one of two ways. First, you can befriend a crow and save its life. If the crow petitions a spirit on your behalf, there is a small chance he will take notice. Second, you can be afflicted by Omen Flock. So Omen Flock is a high tier spell. It's a curse. It lasts for some period of time, like a year or something, and ultimately has a chance to kill you at the end. So it's a curse. You can be afflicted by the Omen Flock, affected by a terrible accident or a disease. Like at the end of the spell's term, you roll, and then something awful happens to you. And crows are survivors, and the wise crow spirit like survivors. So if you are literally the target of one of his spells and live, then you might be binding this root. But there's no test per se, so it's not like you seek it out as much as you save a crow's life and the spirit then blesses you. So I don't know how you would necessarily get this in game. No, we have Percy started with this. So one of our characters has started with this. So let's look at the spells because that gives us sort of an idea. So the first tier spells, Carrion Tongue. The caster gets a taste for carrion for a day. You can eat corpses in any state of decay without revulsion or fear of disease, and you get a +4 save against disease or any spells with disease effects. Those are sort of the kind of things we have. So he can eat anything, but oof, that's a rough haul. But Dark Cloak enlarges your cloak, gives it the appearance of a large shadowy wings, and you gain +2 to all stealth and conceal checks, and +2 bonus to defenses. That's a great spell. It's a word, so he can cast it really quickly in combat. That's the idea. Messenger summons a crow, and he can send a message to someone with the crow. It also has the uncanny ability, so if he knows about where the recipient is, the bird automatically gets there. But if he doesn't know, there's a 25% chance, or you can save versus your power with a difficulty of 20, which is very difficult for most characters at these levels. But it is possible. And again, you can be clever with some of these spells, and definitely as a GM, you would let some things go. So, for instance, when Magnus was taken by the goblins and the party could see the camp, he cast Messenger and sent Magnus a message, knowing that he was in the camp. He didn't know exactly where, but he knew he was in the camp. And maybe I should specify the distance, the area which constitutes knowing where someone is. If you know someone's in town, that's probably good enough. But if they're hidden away, maybe it isn't good enough, right? So maybe we have to specify a little bit. Sometimes a little vagueness is okay. A little bit of GM fiat is okay there. So there you go. Perch. You can perch on a narrow ledge on the top of a post without fail. You can perch on platforms but not otherwise hold your weight. You can stand, fight, and cast as though you're staying on solid ground, and can only be knocked off your perch by effects and abilities that push you or knock you out of your hex or knock you prone. And you get a +2 to checks where being light as a bird and or having an uncanny sense of balance would help you. So he can perch like a bird. Weird, but he can. Talk to Keen Bird. You place a penny on your shoulder, and a wise crow takes the penny and perches on your shoulder. The crow acts as your eyes, giving you +2 to search checks, and then Taste of Carrion fouls a normal crate of food. It's still edible, but anyone who's trying to eat it has to make a toughness or power save or puke it up. Those are sort of his first tier spells. Those are his low grade spells. Notice that there's not a ton of combat utility here, strangely enough. Like there's not Dark Cloak for sure, Perch maybe, right? And there's not a ton of things here that he can necessarily pull out in a pinch, and do, but I do believe, but it's flavorful, and he has gotten some use out of this first tier so far. Now the player has not been around every session, so he hasn't gotten quite as much use as maybe would be nice. But that's sort of a first tier. It's an interesting first tier. Now I could add a spell or two there, but I probably won't until he goes back and gets his thing, gets his third circle, or for some, doesn't go back, but the crow spirit calls on him for a favor. Second circle spells are where things sort of come together. Now, no character has second circle spells in our campaign yet because no one is high enough level. Crow's Court summons a crow court and make your case against the target who has either wronged you or committed some injustice. You save. The target's found guilty, so you have to make a test. You have to save. You have to make a test against wit or charisma. The target's found guilty by the court. A crow will be sent every day to harass the target, steal small items from them, crap on them, and otherwise make their life miserable for a year. This will continue for 1 year until the target makes amends for his wrongdoing. This has no specific mechanical effect in game, or it might give the target a -1. This is an option: awareness, wit, or charisma to reflect him being followed and harassed by crows. So almost more flavor, and yet that's one of my favorite spells in this list. Crow's Mask is an attack. You get like the plague mask with the razor beak, but it always hits the head. So that's sort of interesting. At any time during the spell's duration, you may let out a horrible screech, which ends the spell, but then they have to save or become afraid. And I should make these saves 14. That is typically sort of how it goes. The DL is 14 and the save is 14. Filcher, you summon a crow to steal an item. It can either be held or worn, and then you get to make a save. Or you can use your legerdemain skill, your pickpocket, effectively against their skill or awareness. So it's either pickpocketing at range, or the crow goes and gets a 14. Foul Fury is an attack. Now, don't get me wrong, I would not necessarily use this attack. This is not super powerful attack. It does have Pierce 2. If it does hit the head, which is about a 1 in 6 chance, it gets Pierce 12, and the target must save or be blinded. So that's... Now, keep in mind, so one thing you can also do, one of the effects you can do with a spell is hold it for up to 3 rounds. So he could take this spell, cast it in round 1, and hold it and wait. With one hand, he can hold it. And he could wait for sort of a good time to release it. And releasing is free once you cast the spell. And you can still act with one hand and hold that spell. So there are some tactical uses for that. I would not sit there and drum roll this spell. It's not worth it damage-wise really to do that. You're going to do more damage attacking dudes. Um, but one interesting thing here is it uses an attack skill of 14 no matter what your attack skill is, and there's no real range penalty. You're not shooting this at range. You are sending the bird to go get him. So there you go. Foul Squire gives you effectively a familiar. So there's a lot of sort of mini effects here, but largely gives you a bird NPC which hangs out, collects small trinkets, performs odd jobs, eats bugs and small vermin, and keeps your domicile free of them. Um, it does provide the master one inspiration that can be used to reroll a failed awareness check or a check where the master would otherwise be surprised. And this replenishes when the master's inspiration does. So it gives you an extra chip that can only be used for certain things. Alternately, this inspiration can be used to negate a hit against its master after the damage is rolled, which is unique because you can't do that otherwise. But this kills the squire. So the squire can sacrifice itself. If you're going to take a big hit from a giant, for instance, the squire can throw itself in the way of the attack, deflecting it just enough. Speak with birds allows you to speak with birds. And then talk to wise bird is effectively a better version of talk to keen bird. And again, you put a penny on your shoulder, the bird comes and takes it, and this whispers advice to you, giving you a +2 to checks requiring charisma or wit, which is a few of them, so social and like lore and stuff. So the bird's your advisor, effectively, or pertaining to riddles and puzzles. And that's the Foul Bellows. Those are the types of spells that we typically that you typically end up with, right? We're trying to do a lot of theme. There might be a mechanic or two in there that is unique to that rune, and that's sort of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make that sort of a thing, right? So he's a master of bird law. my son, he's a master of bird law. Um, I'm actually afraid because he's like really excited to get Crow's Court when he levels up, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't, I don't know that I'm going to be able to handle that effect. Um, so there you go. So that's it. I think I'm going to leave you with that. This was a long one, so again, thank you for indulging me. This was, this was the magic. Runebearer's magic, and hopefully it was interesting. And I will talk to you later.